It all started when my neighbor, Karen, looked at my cat and said that he had the devil in his eyes. If there's one thing that nobody teaches you in life, it's that the greatest danger doesn't live in dark alleys or abandoned forests. It could well be in the house next door, with flowered curtains, a forced smile and a cross hanging from its neck. I only understood this too late, when my neighbor, let's call her the enlightened one of the apocalypse, decided that my cat was, you see, the incarnation of the devil. It was supposed to be a normal day. And when I say normal, I mean that kind of day when you just want to stay in, have a coffee, let the cat climb on the sofa, and forget there's a world outside. But the universe, with its bad stand-up irony, had other plans, and those plans involved a woman with a look that seemed to have read every mystical blog on the internet and thought she knew more than the entire Vatican. She showed up at my door with that fake smile of someone who has already decided that she is going to invade your peace with insane theories. She said she had sensed something wrong coming from my house, that the energy was dense, dark, charged, and before I could explain that maybe it was just the smell of noodles burning in the kitchen, she pointed directly at my cat, there, lying on the carpet, looking like he just wanted to sleep for another 5 hours, was the feline Antichrist. According to this woman's free interpretation, the cat did absolutely nothing. It didn't even move. It didn't even blink. And yet, for her, this was a clear sign of demonic possession. From then on, things escalated with a speed not even found in the most contrived supernatural horror films. The next day, she left a pot of rock salt on my apartment doorstep, coarse salt, as if my cat was a picanha about to be roasted by Beelzebub. I laughed. Because, of course, what else are you going to do when your neighbor starts acting like a mixture of Ghostbuster and soap opera butt? But it wasn't just salt. There were the flyers. Yes, flyers. With images of eyes on fire, crosses, poorly translated Bible passages, and a telephone number that, according to her, was for a spiritual liberation institution. I checked it out. It was a direct line to a church that looked more like a makeshift cult in the basement of someone who has watched too much Supernatural without understanding the critique. And the worst thing was that she wouldn't let go. She started appearing more frequently, with bottles of anointed oil, with blessed water, which tasted more like chlorine than a blessing, with long speeches about how animals are receptacles of darkness in modern times. All this while my cat slept, looking as bored as only a 14-year-old animal can look. Then came the apex of bizarreness. She tried to convince me, in fact, she begged me, her eyes shining with fanaticism, to let her take the cat for a cleansing ritual. I don't know what scared me more, the audacity of her thinking this was an acceptable idea, or the certainty with which she spoke, as if she were doing humanity a favor, as if, by ridding my cat of the evil entities, she was saving the city from an inevitable apocalypse. At that point, any sense of humor I had was already being buried in some corner of my patience, because it's a fine line between being eccentric and being a public danger. And this woman was jumping that line, but I hadn't seen anything yet, because the worst was yet to come. And when it came, it made me pick up the phone with a trembling hand. I thought she'd be satisfied with the no I gave her. I thought that the look of contempt I gave her when she talked about bathing my cat in sanctified water under the waning moon would be enough for her to understand that she had already crossed the line. But I underestimated fanaticism's ability to ignore any trace of common sense. She didn't give up, not in the slightest. In fact, it seemed that my no only ignited even more that savior of the neighborhood flame that was burning inside her. And that's when things went from uncomfortable to downright scary. First came the notes, little folded pieces of paper, left on my doorstep, sometimes even slipped underneath. Some had passages from the Bible scribbled in blue pen, others phrases like, "Evil comes in the form of innocence," "Don't be fooled by the soft paws," or the one that bothered me the most, Today he meows, tomorrow he talks. I would have liked to say it was a joke, but the shaky handwriting and the number of exclamation marks left no doubt that she was taking it seriously. One day I came home from work to find a red candle burning next to the door. Just the candle, on a disposable plate, smoke still coming out. My cat, on the other side of the door, meowing as if to say, "This is very wrong." I looked at the scene, and for a second, I thought I might have fallen for a bad prank. But it wasn't a hidden camera. It was just the raw insanity of someone who decided that his divine mission was to exorcise a domestic animal. The next day, I installed a camera on the door, because when the madness starts to escalate like that, you stop laughing and start protecting yourself. And I'm glad I did. Because it was this camera that recorded the moment she actually tried to break into the apartment. It was dawn, 3 in the morning, and there she was, in her nightgown, her hair messy, holding a plastic bottle with the label ripped off. She applied oil to the doorknob, she made the sign of the cross 3 times, and muttered something I can only describe as improvised Latin. Then he tried to turn the handle as if he were just going to open it and walk in. The door was locked, of course, but the mere fact that she tried, with that morbid calm, made my stomach churn. It wasn't about delirium anymore. It was invasion. It was real disturbance. And you think it stopped there? The next day, she knocked on my door. Not once, but 7 times. 7 rhythmic knocks, like some kind of bizarre code. When I opened it, she was wide-eyed, with a Bible in her hand and a last-chance expression. She said she'd had a dream, that she saw flames coming out of my apartment, that my cat, with eyes of fire, was whispering words in languages she couldn't understand, and that if I didn't allow the exorcism, she would have to take action. I felt goosebumps rise on my skin. She said this with a disturbing serenity, like someone handing out a pizzeria flyer, but announcing the end of the world. I slammed the door in her face. I called the building manager. I called the concierge. I explained the situation, showed them the videos. They said they would talk to her. But believe me, that's like pouring water on the fire of an entire building using an eyedropper. And that same night came the moment when her outburst reached its peak. 3:30 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my cat meowing as if something was wrong. That meow that isn't hunger, isn't attention, it's an alarm. I got up, went to the door, and saw smoke. Not inside the house, but in the hallway. I opened the door slowly and was faced with a scene that still seems like a replayed nightmare. Her, in white, sitting in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by lit candles, a huge crucifix hanging from her neck, and a black-covered book open in her hands. She was saying incomprehensible words while throwing what looked like flour on the floor in the shape of circles. In the center was a bowl of something that definitely wasn't incense. The smell was acidic. It burned the nose. It made you crave it. And then she saw my cat, who, by the way, was standing next to me, looking at her with the same expression as me. Pure shock. She pointed, shouted something about the seal being broken, and jumped up, coming towards us with her arms raised. It was at that moment that the adrenaline took over. I closed the door, locked all the locks, and went straight to the phone. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. That was it. The point where reality gave up and gave way to a full-blown episode of insanity. The emergency attendant answered quickly, but my brain was in chaos. I tried to explain what was happening in words that made sense, but it was difficult. How do you sum up a neighbor going berserk trying to exorcise her cat in the hallway at 3 in the morning, surrounded by candles and shouting in improvised Latin without sounding like the crazy person in the story? I managed to stammer out that it was an attempted break-in, that the woman was disturbing my safety, that there was fire, smoke, and behavior that was completely out of touch with reality. On the other end of the line, the voice remained calm, repeating that I needed to keep the door locked and wait. He said that a car was already on its way, but every second seemed to last an eternity. My cat was restless. He paced back and forth, as if he sensed something in the air, and I honestly couldn't blame him. There was a heavy, suffocating energy, as if the whole corridor was contaminated by a collective delirium. I sat on the floor, leaning against the door, listening to the woman's footsteps outside. At times, she was crying. At others, she mumbled. There was even a moment when she started to laugh on her own, a low, almost childish laugh, but one that resonated like a threat. When the police arrived, the sound of their boots echoing in the corridor was such a relief that my whole body relaxed at once. I looked through the peephole and saw the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the walls. She was there, still in the same place, now in a fetal position, rocking slightly back and forth, like a child who has lost its mother. The elevator door opened and 2 policemen came out. One of them immediately looked at her, the other analyzed the surroundings, and in a matter of seconds, the scene took on a new layer of surrealism. The woman stood up slowly, held out her arms like someone receiving a blessing, and shouted, "They've come for you! Take the carrier!" The police tried to talk to her, asked her to calm down, but she didn't even seem to listen. She only repeated nonsensical things, sentences interspersed with sobs and prophetic words. They tried to approach her gently, but had to restrain her. Things escalated quickly. As they restrained her, she shouted my name and pointed to the door as if I were a witch locked in a castle, laughing at her own spell. It was one of those moments when you wonder where in life you cross the line into absurdity without realizing it. There I was, on the other side of the door, with a confused cat, listening to my neighbor being taken away by the police while calling for a spiritual battle that only existed in her head. After the confusion passed and silence took over again, came the aftermath. The smoke from the candles still hung in the hallway. The marks on the floor, the circles, the symbols, everything remained there, like a concrete reminder of a nightmare. The police collected information, asked me for the videos from the camera, and suggested that I file a formal report, just in case. Precaution, as if this was something that could be avoided with a simple document. The next morning, the liquidator sent a message asking to talk. The meeting was pathetic. Half the building knew what had happened. The other half made up even crazier versions. Some people swore they saw the cat floating in the window. Some said the woman was possessed and that the energy in the building had changed. Others just wanted to make sure the story didn't end up in the headlines. The vast majority, of course, just wanted distance. The woman was taken for psychiatric evaluation. I was told that she had a history, that she had shown eccentric behavior before, but nothing this extreme. That night had been out of the ordinary even for her. I was shocked at how naturally some people dealt with it, as if it was all just a bad phase. A bad phase doesn't involve cat exorcisms, flower circles, and attempted break-ins. I spent days with the feeling that something was still wrong. Even with the door locked, even with the cat apparently calm, there was something in the air, a weight, a memory vibrating in the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, sweaty, illuminated by the dim light of the candles, muttering words that seemed to have come out of a collective delirium. And the worst part was knowing that it still didn't feel like the end. Even though the next few days were relatively quiet, that feeling of a temporary pause was almost unbearable, as if the world had pressed a hold button, but everything else was running in the background. The building, which had once looked like a pile of concrete with indifferent people, now looked like a post-apocalyptic theater where every neighbor acted as if nothing had happened, but at the same time, no one could really pretend. It was the kind of uncomfortable silence that only exists when something very wrong has been experienced by many people at the same time, and no one wants to be the first to name it. But what made me most uneasy wasn't people's behavior or the memory of the bizarre night. It was the cat. He wasn't the same anymore. He still ate, he still slept, he still followed me around the house, but there was something in his eyes, as if his soul had taken a step back. He would stare at points on the wall. Sometimes he meowed in the dark. At other times, he would hide behind the bathroom door for hours. and as much as I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was the stress, maybe he was just reflecting my anxiety, there was a part of me that couldn't silence that dirty, improbable thought. What if, by some crazy twist of fate, she had touched something for real? Yes, I know how that sounds. I'm not the type who believes in energy, spirituality, aura, chakras, or whatever the fashionable name is. Never have been. But there comes a time when the rational world starts to seem too small to explain certain sensations. Like that invisible presence you feel when you enter a room, or the shiver that runs up your spine for no reason. I started to feel this more often. A tension in the air, a heaviness in the atmosphere, as if the whole apartment was breathing with me, but out of rhythm. I started to catch myself avoiding the hallway mirror, avoiding the corner of the room where she had thrown that strange powder through the crack in the door, even avoiding the direct gaze of my cat, as if the house had been given a new map, with zones that were no longer neutral. One morning, I woke up to a low, dragging noise. I thought it was furniture creaking, or maybe the cat playing with something. I got up, still a bit dizzy, and walked around the house. The lights were off. The floor was cold, and then I saw him. He was standing in front of the living room door, staring at the lower opening where the light from the corridor comes in. His body was completely rigid. His ass was inflated, and his eyes were fixed. The corridor light blinked, twice, 3 times. Then it went out. It paralyzed me. I don't know how long I stood there watching that scene as if it were part of a movie where I was the idiot who didn't run away when he clearly should have. My instinct said, go back, lock the bedroom door, pretend nothing happened. But some part of my brain was still trying to be the adult in the situation. I went over to the cat, tried to pull it. He resisted. I'd never done that before. I pushed. He growled. My cat, who never growled, who never showed his teeth at me. When the light in the corridor came back on, just for a second, I saw something I didn't want to see. A piece of paper. Someone had shoved another bloody note through the door. Folded. Perfect. With obsessive precision. I didn't want to open it, but human curiosity is a special kind of curse. I picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate me. I opened it slowly. There was only one sentence. He hasn't been cleaned yet. The handwriting was the same. That nervous writing, with the letters pressed too hard, the strokes cut aggressively. The paper smelled of something strange. Not perfume, not mold. It was a damp, sweet, almost metallic smell. It took my breath away. The next day, I went back to the concierge. No one had seen anything. Floor cameras? Still under maintenance. No one else had reported any strange movement. And it was at that moment that I realized maybe I was alone in this. Alone with my cat. Alone with this story that no longer seemed mine, but an absurd narrative that had been sewn around my life and was now dragging me along with it. It was no longer about the woman. It was no longer about the neighborhood. It was about what remained, about the residue she left behind, about the doubt she planted. I spent weeks trying to get back into a routine, moving furniture around, burning incense that I didn't even know worked, mentally repeating that it had all been an external outbreak, that none of it had really affected me. But every night, when the lights went out and the sound of the building became just that distant hum of plumbing and fridges, I felt it. That same pressure in the air, that same presence that seemed to move in the shadows, that feeling that the cat was watching me rather than following me. Maybe he really was different, or maybe I was. Maybe evil isn't in the things others do, but in what's left over afterwards. And maybe, just maybe, she left more than tickets. Don't forget to leave your like and your opinion in the comments.